The mammoth multi-phase Indian general election is underway with phase one of voting over and 6 more to go. This means more than a month of voting in constituencies across the country and campaigning. Now, as you said, over the weekend on the campaign trail, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi sparked an outcry over a speech that he made in the western state of Rajasthan. This was in a constituency that goes to the polls in the second phase of voting on Friday. Let's take a listen.
Previously, when the Indian National Congress was in power, they said that the first beneficiaries of the country's wealth are Muslims. They mean that this wealth will be distributed among those who have more children. Will the money earned through your hard work be given to infiltrators? Are you okay with that?
Now, following the speech, more than 17,000 people at last count signed a petition to India's Election Commission demanding action against Prime Minister Modi for hate speech against Muslims and for violating the Commission's moral code of conduct. And the opposition Congress Party has done the same, petitioning the Election Commission. Now, for more on campaigning in India, we have Professor Irfan Nooruddin from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let's start with your reaction to Prime Minister Modi's comments, and also for our international audiences, is there a difference between the Prime Minister's rhetoric for domestic and international audiences?
For anyone following India's elections over the last decade, Mr. Modi's comments don't come as a complete surprise. He has often and very successfully used anti-Muslim hate speech as a way of stoking his base. The party that he represents, the Bharatiya Janata Party or the BJP, is very proudly proclaims itself as a party of Hindu nationalism. They are outspoken in their demand and their desire, in their ambition to recreate India as a Hindu state, abandoning its traditional secular credentials that were part of the Indian Constitution at independence in 1947. The speech on Sunday follows a couple of different kinds of speeches that he's been making recently, in which he's been using the pejorative association with Muslims for demeaning the Congress Party. When the Congress Party released its manifesto ahead of the elections, Mr. Modi said it reeked of the Muslim League, a pre-independence party that led to the creation of Pakistan. For speeches in the last year, standing next to Mr. Biden in Washington, standing next to President Macron at Bastille Day last July, Modi has begun to use the language of India finally being free after 1,000 years of colonial rule, right? The only way that math adds up is if you now buy his version of history, which is that Indian Muslims are not, in fact, genuine Indians, but are infiltrators, who are intruders, who have come from elsewhere. The speech on Sunday was particularly shocking for the claims made that what the Congress Party seeks to do, should it be elected, is come into people's homes, take their property. He invoked their mothers' and their sisters' gold and the jewelry that the women hand down over generations, that the Congress Party was going to come, take it and redistribute it forcibly to give it to Muslims. In that speech that he played, he says, to people who have more children. This again is a trope trying to raise fears of demographic change in India, a stereotype that Muslims have more children than Hindus, and that this is part of a way of eroding Hindu majority in the country. So it's an ugly speech, but it's one that's quite consistent with the way he has campaigned over the last 10 years at the center, and arguably for the last 20 years that he's been in the state of Gujarat as well. And yes, it is a completely different image than the one projected on the world stage. On the world stage, Mr. Modi likes to talk about India's democratic credentials, about its value as a partner to countries like France and the United States, in particular as each of them now seeks alternatives to China. But I would argue, Leela, that while he's made that argument, it has been with the acquiescence of people in those Western countries who have chosen to look the other way from this kind of rhetoric and what has happened in India over the last decade, because for right now, India is more convenient to them as a partner, even if its democratic record is eroding. And so the blame is clearly his, but also ours to share.
Right. Let's talk about, the institutions, these petitions to the Election Commission. Now, in cricket mad India, a lot of Indians refer to the commission as the neutral umpire. Now, as a professor, how would you grade the umpire?
In this present election, the umpire is right now going to be getting a bit of a failing grade. But it's early days yet, and they're in a difficult situation. So the Election Commission of India is the main arbiter of India's elections. It is, in theory, an independent body, a bureaucratic body that enforces what is called the Model Code of Conduct. This is a set of rules that all parties are expected to abide by during the campaign season. Much of this is really making sure that elected politicians don't abuse their authority. So you can't campaign while you're on official government business. You can't buy alcohol and give out money as a way of buying votes. But you also can't use religious imagery and religious iconography in campaigning. And Mr. Modi and his party is clearly in violation of this letter of the law, and definitely the spirit of the law. Many of them have been using the images of Lord Ram in the campaign, which just flies in the face of the Election Commission's own rules. Now, the Commission has quite a bit of power to sanction politicians for breaking these rules, right? They can demand apologies, they can force candidates to actually step aside and not be eligible to run if they're found in gross violation. But no one expects them to be able to do any of that vis-a-vis Prime Minister Modi. And this, unfortunately, feeds a growing perception that the Election Commission of India, like many of India's other state institutions, has been compromised. Mr. Modi changed the way election commissioners are appointed. So instead of being appointed by the bureaucracy, they're now appointed by a high-level commission that he chairs. So in fact, the referees, to use your analogy, are being picked by one of the teams. I do not mean to impugn the professionalism or the impartiality of the election commissioners. One hopes that they continue to do their job. But to the extent that the legitimacy of the election depends on everyday citizens, both his supporters but also the opposition supporters, feeling like they had a fair shake and that the election was free and fair, all of this does not bode well for the overall legitimacy of India's elections going forward.
And very quickly, because we're running out of time, but in terms of, just policing and umpiring this election that goes on for so long. In a country like France, elections happen in a day, and there are very strict rules of campaigning, even media coverage. I mean, is this a challenge in Indian elections?
Much more so in the world of social media and the internet, right? The rules were really set up in a pre-internet world, and the purpose for this long election is quite beautiful. The Indian state requires that every citizen have access to a polling booth no more than 2 kilometers from where they live, right? So instead of citizens having to make long journeys to a polling booth, especially those in more rural and remote areas of the country, the Indian election goes to them. This is, in a country with 1 billion eligible voters, this is an incredible logistical feat and requires a lot of time. And so this election's going to go 7 phases over the better part of 6 weeks before it's all concluded. But what that means is that the government's ability, the Election Commission's ability to police what is being said, and more importantly, the disinformation and misinformation spread by social media, is a completely different world than the one that they once were doing this in, where it was really, can you control what's on the radio and on the television? WhatsApp forwards, right? Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, and all of that now have made that job much more difficult. And I think in the long run, India, like many other countries, is going to have to grapple with how do you protect the integrity of the election while countering the different ways in which every politician wants to get their word out, including often by telling untruths.
Thank you so much, Professor Nooruddin. This is an issue that's going to come up with a lot of elections this year. Back to you, Nadia.
Thank you very much, Leela Jacinto, for us there.